The window down. ID now. Don't reach for anything.
Good morning. I'm an assistant U.S. attorney. I'm here for grand jury.
Yeah, right. You people always got a story. Step out.
So you people again, my dash cam's recording.
Badges are fake online. Out of the car, you're going in cuffs.
Touch me and you're assaulting a federal prosecutor. Call your supervisor. Now.
Officer Brad Miller had been with the Chicago Police Department for 9 years. Every single one of those years was spent patrolling the Loop right in the center of the Windy City, where steel skyscrapers pierced the clouds and billions of dollars in commerce flowed unseen. I learned later that he had generated 14 complaints during those 9 years. 14 separate incidents where civilians, almost all of them Black or Latino men, accused him of racial profiling, aggressive intimidation, and language that crossed every line of professional conduct. Every single one of those complaints had been marked as unfounded or closed with a slap on the wrist and minimal retraining. The union shielded him. His sergeant called him proactive. His lieutenant looked the other way. But on a crisp Wednesday morning in downtown Chicago, everything about Brad Miller's protected career was about to come crashing down. My name is Marcus Sterling, and I am an assistant United States attorney. I had just parked my black BMW 5 Series in front of the Dirksen Federal Building on South Dearborn Street. I was running 15 minutes early for a grand jury presentation regarding a massive wire fraud case. It represented 18 months of investigation, 47 boxes of hard evidence, and 3 cooperating witnesses. This was the case that was going to define my career. But Officer Miller didn't know that. He looked at a black man in a luxury sedan, and his bias told him only one thing: I didn't belong. That false assumption triggered an escalation that would end in his termination, national outrage, and an $8 million settlement. And the best part, it would all be captured on 2 cameras that Miller didn't realize were recording every single word. Before I continue telling you this story, where are you tuning in from? If this is your first time hearing my story, please hit that subscribe button. Experiences like mine need to be shared, and your support helps us bring more truth to light. Downtown Chicago, the beating heart of the Midwest's economy and federal law enforcement. The streets were humming with purposeful energy. At 8:47 on a Wednesday morning, men and women in tailored suits moved between buildings that housed Fortune 500 companies and the machinery of justice itself. The Dirksen Federal Building stood like a glass and steel fortress of authority, the place where federal judges decided the fate of the powerful and the corrupt. The sky was overcast, typical for Chicago, but the air was crisp. It was the kind of morning that made you believe in order, fairness, and the rule of law. I had been a federal prosecutor for 11 years. I had graduated at the top of my class from Morehouse College and then the University of Chicago Law School, clerked for a federal appellate judge, and joined the U.S. Attorney's Office, where I prosecuted everything from gang racketeering to white-collar corruption. I'd won 83% of my trials. I had been featured in the Chicago Tribune for my work dismantling a sophisticated cryptocurrency laundering ring. The Attorney General had personally commended my service. My colleagues called me sharp. My supervisors called me relentless. Defense attorneys called me the prosecutor they least wanted to see across the aisle. That morning, I had left my condo in the South Loop at 8:15, giving myself extra time because I never liked to rush before a grand jury presentation. I needed to be calm, focused, and ready. I'd rehearsed my opening statement 3 times the night before. The fraud case involved a tech CEO who had defrauded investors of $42 million using complex financial instruments, shell companies, and offshore accounts, the kind of case that required absolute precision in presentation. I drove my black BMW 5 Series up Dearborn, the morning light reflecting off the glass buildings. I'd bought the car 2 years earlier. I saved for it carefully and paid cash. It wasn't flashy. It was reliable, powerful, and safe. It had one feature. I particularly valued a dashboard camera system that recorded continuously whenever the car was running. Front and interior cameras, high-quality audio and video. I'd installed it after seeing too many news stories about traffic stops that went south, about he said, she said, disputes where the officer's word was always taken as gospel over the civilians. I never expected to need it, but I believed in evidence, in documentation, in proof. I pulled into a legal parking spot directly in front of the courthouse. It was a space clearly marked for official vehicles and attorneys on court business. The signs were unambiguous: official court business only, authorized personnel. I put the car in park, checked my tie in the rearview mirror, and reached for my briefcase on the passenger seat. Inside that briefcase were my grand jury materials, my prosecutor's badge, and my Department of Justice identification. My phone showed 8:49. I had plenty of time, but I never made it out of the car. Officer Brad Miller had been walking his beat along Dearborn Street when he saw my BMW pull up. He saw the car first, a luxury vehicle, probably $65,000 shiny, kept in mint condition. Then he saw the driver, a black man, broad shoulders, professional clothing, confident posture, and something in Miller's brain misfired completely. He didn't see a federal prosecutor. He didn't see someone who belonged in this building, in this zip code, or in this tax bracket. He saw what years of unchecked bias had trained him to see: someone out of place, someone suspicious, someone who probably didn't own that car. His mental checklist started running: wrong demographic, wrong car, wrong time. I was someone who needed to be checked, controlled, and put in my place. Miller walked directly to my driver's side window and rapped on it with his knuckles hard enough to make me jump. I had been reviewing notes on my phone. The sudden knock startled me, and I looked up to see a uniformed CPD officer staring at me with an expression that wasn't professional curiosity. It was pure hostility. I recognized it immediately. As a black man in America, I'd seen it before. Not often in my suit, but enough to know exactly what it meant. I rolled down the window, my dashboard camera recording everything. The timestamp in the corner was ticking, the audio crystal clear. "Good morning, officer. Can I help you?" Miller didn't waste time with pleasantries. "You people think you can park wherever you want. ID now, and don't reach for anything." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. You people. The phrase that carried centuries of racism in 2 syllables. The phrase that reduced me to nothing but my skin color. The phrase that told me exactly what kind of cop I was dealing with. My legal mind kicked into gear even as the anger flooded through my veins. I was being profiled on camera in front of a federal courthouse by an officer who had just used openly racist language. This wasn't just bias. This was evidence of discrimination so blatant it was almost stupid. You people. My voice stayed controlled, but my gaze was sharp. Okay, well look, I'm a federal prosecutor parked legally at my own building, and you just made a huge mistake. Miller laughed. He actually laughed. The sound was dismissive, condescending, filled with disbelief that this black man could possibly be what I claimed. Sure, and I'm the mayor, a prosecutor in a BMW that is probably stolen. There it was. The assumption lay completely bare. Not just that I didn't belong, but that I was a criminal, that the car was stolen, that my professional appearance was a disguise, that everything about me must be fraudulent because I was black, successful, and driving a car Miller decided I shouldn't have. I had heard enough. I reached into my suit jacket and pulled out my federal prosecutor's badge. The gold shield caught the morning light. I held it up to the window where Miller could see it clearly. Marcus Sterling, check yourself. I hope your body cam is on. My car's camera definitely is. I pointed at the small camera mounted on my dashboard with my other hand. The red recording light was visible. The lens was pointed directly at Miller's face. Every word, every sneer, every racist assumption was being captured in high definition with a timestamp and audio that would be admissible in any court in the country. Miller looked at the badge, the federal shield, the official Department of Justice seal, my name engraved on it, my photograph on the ID card attached, all of it legitimate, all of it right in front of his face. His expression shifted slightly, just slightly, a flicker of uncertainty, but his pride, his bias, his absolute conviction that he was right, all of it pushed him forward past the warning signs. He didn't back down. He doubled down. That could be fake. Those badges are all over the internet. You think I'm stupid? I stared at him in disbelief. This is a genuine federal prosecutor's badge. You can verify it with one phone call. Call the U.S. Attorney's Office. Call the courthouse security. They know me. I work here. I don't care about your fake badge or your camera. You're parked in a restricted zone. Step out of the vehicle now. I pointed at the sign 10 feet away, my badge still in my hand. That sign says official court business. I am here on official court business. I am a federal prosecutor. I just showed you my badge. I work in that building right there. I have a grand jury presentation in 30 minutes. Miller's jaw tightened. Anyone can buy a badge online. I've seen it before. People like you always trying to con their way out of situations. People like me, my voice rose. You mean black men? Because that's what this is about, isn't it? You saw a black man in a nice car and your brain couldn't process that he might actually belong here. So you decided I'm a criminal. The car's stolen. The badge is fake. Everything about me must be fraudulent because I don't fit your narrow view of who gets to drive a BMW and work at a federal courthouse. Watch your tone. No, you watch yours. I showed you my badge. I told you where I work. You can see the courthouse right in front of you. You can call security and verify who I am. But you won't, because this was never about parking or credentials. This is about you seeing a black man and assuming criminality. Step out of the vehicle. Last warning. Miller's face flushed red. Don't tell me what this is. I'm conducting a legitimate investigation. Investigation of what I'm parked legally. I've identified myself. I've told you where I work. What crime do you think I've committed? You're being argumentative and uncooperative. I'm being a federal prosecutor who knows his rights. There's a difference. Step out of the vehicle. Do you think officers who use phrases like, "you people," should face immediate termination? Drop your answer below. My legal training clashed with my survival instincts. I knew this order was unlawful. I knew Miller had no probable cause, no reasonable suspicion, no legal justification for detaining me. But I also knew what happened to black men who refused police orders, even unlawful ones. I'd prosecuted cases where refusal led to violence, where compliance didn't save you, but refusal guaranteed escalation. I made my decision. No, I'm not getting out. You have no legal basis to detain me. You stopped me because I'm black and driving a nice car. You used racist language. You accused me of auto theft, and it's all on camera. Miller grabbed the door handle and yanked it open. That's it. You're under arrest for obstruction. I kept my hands visible on the steering wheel, my voice raised so the camera would catch every word. I am not obstructing. I am refusing to comply with an unlawful order. I am a federal prosecutor with the United States Attorney's Office. I am asserting my Fourth Amendment rights, and you are violating them. Miller reached in and grabbed my arm. Get out of the car now. Don't touch me. I pulled back instinctively. I am a federal officer. You are assaulting a federal officer. You're resisting arrest. I'm resisting an illegal detention. Call your supervisor. A crowd had started to gather. People walking toward the courthouse. Lawyers with briefcases. FBI agents heading to meetings. Federal marshals. They stopped and stared at the scene unfolding. A Chicago PD officer trying to drag a well-dressed black man out of a BMW parked legally in front of the federal courthouse. Someone in the crowd recognized me. That's Marcus Sterling. He's a prosecutor. He works here. Another voice shocked. Is that cop arresting him? Miller had his hand on my arm now, pulling hard. I resisted, not violently, but firmly, using my weight, my leverage, everything I knew about not giving in to illegal force. My voice stayed loud, clear for the cameras and the witnesses. I am not resisting arrest. I am resisting assault. This officer used racial slurs, accused me of theft without evidence, and is now physically attacking me in front of the courthouse where I work. And then a voice cut through the chaos like a gavel strike. Miller, let him go right now. Captain David Ross, 22 years on the force, had been walking past on his way to a meeting inside the courthouse. He'd seen the commotion, seen the crowd, and then he'd seen who Miller was trying to arrest. His face went pale. Miller froze, his hand still gripping my arm. This man refused to comply with a lawful order and obstructed my investigation. Ross walked closer. Counselor Sterling, are you injured? My voice shook with barely controlled rage. Physically, no. But this officer racially profiled me, used the phrase, "you people," accused me of stealing my own car, dismissed my federal badge as fake, and then physically assaulted me when I wouldn't submit to an illegal detention. All of it captured on my dashboard camera, and hopefully his body cam. I showed him my prosecutor's badge right at the beginning. He called it fake. He said, people like me buy badges online to cut our way out of situations. Ross's expression went from pale to furious. He turned to Miller. His voice dropped to something cold and final. Release him, step back, and pray your career survives the next hour. But he was resisting. He was asserting his constitutional rights, Ross snapped. He's a federal prosecutor. He works in that building. He's parked legally. He showed you his badge, and you called it fake. And you just committed about 6 violations on camera. Miller let go of my arm. He stepped back. The reality started to sink in through his pride and bias. Ross turned to me. Counselor, I am deeply sorry. This should never have happened. You'll have full access to his body camera, footage, incident reports, everything. I'll personally ensure Internal Affairs gets this immediately. I straightened my suit jacket. An apology doesn't undo what just happened, Captain. I was called you people. I was accused of theft. I was physically assaulted in front of my workplace while trying to do my job. Your apology doesn't change that. No, it doesn't. Ross's voice was sincere. But I can promise you accountability, full accountability. I grabbed my briefcase from the passenger seat. My hands were shaking now. Adrenaline and fury were finally breaking through my professional composure. I have a grand jury presentation in 25 minutes. I'm going to do my job. But when I'm done, I'm filing a formal complaint. And then I'm calling my attorney. Because this isn't just about me. This is about every black man who gets stopped by officers like him and doesn't have a badge or a camera to protect them. Understood. Ross turned to Miller. You're relieved of duty. Return to the precinct immediately. Surrender your badge and weapon. Don't speak to anyone. Don't file any reports. Wait for Internal Affairs. Miller opened his mouth to protest, but Ross cut him off. You used racial language. You profiled a federal prosecutor. You ignored his credentials. You physically assaulted him in front of witnesses on camera. Your career is over. The only question now is whether you face criminal charges. The crowd had grown people with phones out recording. A U.S. Marshal had called courthouse security. 2 more marshals came out, saw me, and immediately understood. Counselor Sterling, one of them said, "Do you need medical attention?" "No, but I need this officer's name badge number and precinct information. I need witness statements, and I need copies of every recording made of this incident." "You'll have all of it." I looked at Miller. I looked him dead in the eyes. "You saw a black man in a nice car and assumed I was a criminal. I showed you my federal prosecutor's badge, a real badge with my name, my photo, the Department of Justice seal, and you called it fake. You didn't see my suit, my briefcase, the federal courthouse right in front of you. You just saw my skin color and decided I didn't belong. That's not policing, that's racism. And now it's evidence." I walked past him into the courthouse, my head high. I had a grand jury to present to criminals, to prosecute justice, to seek. I wouldn't let Officer Brad Miller's racism stop me from doing my job, but I also wouldn't let it go unpunished. Should officers with multiple prior complaints be prohibited from working alone? Let me know what you think. Within 2 hours, the story had reached the U.S. Attorney for the Northern District of Illinois. Within 3 hours, it had reached the Department of Justice in Washington. Within 4 hours, every major news network in the country was running the story. Federal prosecutor, racially profiled and assaulted, in front of courthouse. Chicago cocktails, prosecutor, you people before arrest attempt. Dashboard camera captures entire racist encounter. The video went viral. My car camera footage was crystal clear. High-definition video, perfect audio timestamp, verified. It showed everything. Miller approaching with hostility. His "you people" would comment. His accusation of auto theft. Me pulling out my federal prosecutor's badge, the gold shield clearly visible. Miller looking at it and calling it fake, saying, "People like me buy badges online." His refusal to verify my credentials with a simple phone call. His hands on my arm trying to drag me from the car. My calm assertions of my rights. My clear statements that I was being profiled. The body cam footage, when it was released, told the same story from a different angle. There was no ambiguity, no gray area, no room for interpretation. The outrage was immediate and overwhelming. The Federal Law Enforcement Officers Association issued a statement calling the incident appalling and demanding Miller's immediate termination. The National Bar Association condemned the CPD's handling of officers with biased complaints. The ACLU called for federal intervention. The Chicago police superintendent held an emergency press conference that afternoon. What happened to Assistant U.S. Attorney Sterling is completely unacceptable and does not represent the values of this department. Officer Miller has been placed on immediate suspension without pay pending termination proceedings. We are cooperating fully with the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division investigation. But the damage was done. The video showed the world exactly what I had experienced. A federal prosecutor, on his way to work, profiled and assaulted by an officer who saw his skin color before he saw anything else. The Department of Justice Civil Rights Division opened an investigation within 24 hours, not into Miller alone, but into the CPD's pattern of dismissing complaints against him. 14 complaints. 14 times civilians said he'd profiled them, used excessive force, made racist comments. 14 times the department had cleared him with minimal consequences. Officer Brad Miller was terminated within 2 weeks. The termination letter was brief and devastating. Officer Miller engaged in racial profiling, unlawful detention assault, and conduct unbecoming an officer. He used racist language, was shown a legitimate federal prosecutor's badge, and dismissed it as fake, refused to verify credentials that were presented to him, and physically assaulted the subject without legal justification. His actions violated department policy, state law, and federal civil rights statutes. His employment is terminated immediately. His name is being submitted to the National Decertification Index. He is prohibited from working in law enforcement anywhere in the United States. Miller tried to appeal. The union backed him initially, but once both camera angles were made public, once my testimony was entered into the record, once the magnitude of what he'd done became undeniable on video, they quietly withdrew their support. He issued a statement through an attorney. I made a serious error in judgment. I allowed my perceptions to override my training. I apologize to Attorney Sterling and accept responsibility for my actions. My response was public and unforgiving. You didn't make an error in judgment. You made a choice based on racism. You chose to see a black man in a nice car and assume criminality. You chose to say, "You people." You chose to accuse me of theft. You chose to ignore my credentials. You chose to put your hands on me. Those weren't errors. Those were decisions you've been making for 9 years. And the department let you keep making them until you picked the wrong victim. The lawsuit came 30 days after the incident. I hired the best civil rights attorneys in Chicago, though I barely needed them. The case was ironclad. 2 camera angles, clear audio, racist language, unlawful detention, assault witnesses, and a victim who was a federal prosecutor with unimpeachable credibility. The complaint was surgical. Unlawful detention without probable cause. Racial profiling and discrimination under federal and state law. Assault and battery. Violation of civil rights under color of law. Intentional infliction of emotional distress, failure by CPD to properly train and supervise an officer with 14 prior complaints. The city's attorneys reviewed the evidence, the videos, my credentials, Miller's complaint history, his racist language, captured on multiple cameras, the federal prosecutor as the victim, the courthouse as the location, the witnesses, the national attention. They settled in 3 months. $8 million paid to Marcus Sterling. The fastest settlement in CPD history for a civil rights case. Miller's name went into the National Decertification Index within days of his termination. He would never work in law enforcement again. Not in Illinois, not in any state. The database made sure of that. The CPD announced sweeping reforms 6 weeks after the incident. Mandatory bias intervention after 2 complaints instead of 14. Real-time body camera review for any stop involving allegations of profiling. A dedicated civil rights unit to investigate discrimination complaints within 48 hours. Immediate suspension for any officer using racial language during a stop. Extended probationary periods for officers with any bias-related incidents. I testified before the Chicago City Council. I walked to the microphone in a sharp gray suit, carrying the same briefcase I'd had that morning, the same briefcase Miller hadn't let me open. I didn't ask to be the face of this issue. I began, my voice steady and prosecutorial. I was just trying to go to work. I was just trying to do my job. I'm a federal prosecutor. I prosecute criminals. I seek justice. But on May 15th, I became a victim of the same kind of bias and discrimination I fight against in court. I paused, looking at each council member. Officer Miller saw me and made an assumption based entirely on the color of my skin. He didn't see my suit, my briefcase, or the federal courthouse directly in front of him. He saw a black man in a BMW and decided I must be a criminal. He said, "You people." He accused me of auto theft. I pulled out my federal prosecutor's badge, the same badge I used to enter federal buildings and prosecute criminals. And he looked at it and called it fake. He said, "People like me buy badges online to con our way out of situations." And when I asserted my constitutional rights, he physically assaulted me. The room was silent. I had advantages most victims don't have. I had credentials. I had a badge. I had the United States Department of Justice behind me. I had a camera in my car recording everything. And even with all of that, I still got profiled. I still got called "you people." I still got accused of theft. I still got my arm grabbed and my rights violated. My voice grew harder. Now imagine what happens to people who don't have what I have. Imagine what happens to black men who aren't federal prosecutors, who don't have attorneys on speed dial, who don't have dashboard cameras, who don't have federal agencies backing them up. What happens to them when they get stopped by officers like Brad Miller? What happens when it's their word against a cop with a badge, and the department has already ignored 14 complaints about that cop? I let the question hang in the air. That's who I'm speaking for today. Not just myself. Everyone who looks like me and gets stopped for the crime of existing while successful existing, while black existing in a neighborhood or a car or a building that someone decides we don't belong in. I continued my work as a federal prosecutor. I won my wire fraud case. The grand jury indicted all 7 defendants. 5 of them took plea deals. 2 went to trial. I won both trials. I continued prosecuting corruption, organized crime, and financial fraud. But I also became an advocate. I spoke at law schools about civil rights and prosecutorial responsibility. I testified before Congress about police reform. I pushed for federal legislation requiring decertification for officers with patterns of racial profiling. The case became a landmark. United States Attorney Sterling versus City of Chicago became required reading in police academies and law schools. The dashboard camera footage became a training video for what not to do. My calm assertion of my rights became a template for how to document profiling even while it's happening. But my message never changed. This isn't about me having power. This is about a system that allowed Brad Miller to generate 14 complaints and stay on patrol. This is about bias so normalized that an officer felt comfortable saying "you people" in front of a federal courthouse. This is about training that fails to teach officers that black men can be successful, professional, credentialed, and exactly where they belong. Officer Miller's career is over. That's justice. The city paid $8 million. That's accountability. But money and terminations don't change the fact that I was profiled. They don't erase the moment when a police officer looked at me and saw a criminal instead of a colleague in law enforcement. They don't prevent the next Brad Miller from being hired, trained poorly, and sent out with a badge and a gun to enforce his bias on whoever he decides doesn't fit. The real question is, what changes now? Do departments finally take complaints seriously after 2 instead of 14? Do they finally accept that saying "you people" to a citizen is grounds for immediate termination? Do they finally understand that profiling isn't proactive policing? It's discrimination backed by legal authority. Because if we don't fix the system that protected Brad Miller through 14 documented complaints, if we don't address the bias that lets officers see successful black people and assume criminality, if we don't require cameras in every car and real accountability for every violation, then we're just waiting for the next officer the next victim, and the next $8 million settlement that taxpayers fund because departments won't police their own. Comment below if you think dashboard cameras should be mandatory in all vehicles to protect against profiling. And if you believe stories like this need to be told, if you think accountability matters and reform starts with documentation and awareness, then hit that subscribe button, because we're going to keep exposing these patterns. We're going to keep demanding better. We're going to keep fighting for a world where a federal prosecutor can park in front of his own courthouse without being called "you people" and accused of theft. This isn't just about one officer or one prosecutor. It's about all of us and the system we're willing to tolerate.